Hello and welcome to DigFin Vox, Voices in Digital Finance. I'm your host, Jame DiBiasio. If you enjoyed the program, like, share, subscribe. My guest today is David Runacres, Tokyo-based president for Asia Pacific at Broadridge, a technology vendor that provides numerous services to buy and sell sides. David spoke with me about artificial intelligence, the future of agentic AI, the human touch required to make it work best for institutions, and what he sees going on in Japan. David Runacres of Broadridge, welcome to DigFin Vox.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
It's great to have you here. So you're president for Asia Pacific at Broadridge, based in Tokyo.
Correct.
This is, I guess, a capstone of a long career in financial technology.
Yeah, it is. I'm not going to admit too quickly how long that is, but yeah, it's running into the decades, that's for sure.
Okay. Well, you've seen a lot, and you've been working both internally at your organization and, of course, with clients both on the sell side and the buy side to help them navigate new changes and opportunities. And the big buzzword, of course, is AI. It's inescapable now. Of course, it's not new, really. I mean, large language models are just the next iteration of machine learning techniques that have been building over more than a decade. So, I want to use this conversation to talk a little bit about how the conversation around AI is changing with financial institutions, what you guys are doing, obviously, and maybe we can wrap up with look at Japan in particular, where you're based, but other trends in the region that you think stand out compared to what you might find elsewhere. So, with that, why don't you tell me a little bit about the way you think about AI as a technology, as a tool, also potentially something disruptive to these institutions? Maybe just start with a high-level picture about the way you think about it, the way you have the conversations with your clients, and then we can get into the more nitty-gritty stuff.
Okay. Well, AI has been a buzzword for a few years now, but it's only fairly recently become quite as useful as the promise that it had over the last few years. And I view that as because now we have access to almost unlimited compute power,
Hmm.
right? At the drop of a hat. And there's continued investment still in that. So I just see that's going to get more and more capable over time. And to be honest, AI is largely a brute force computing model. It's very clever and it's machine learning and all that, but it requires phenomenal amounts of system capability. And with that now available, not only has it become something that businesses are looking at, it's your average man on the street can now use it, and that's
Right.
amazing. But like any tool, the ability to get value from it is entirely due to your ability to actually use it appropriately. And that's where a lot of progress has been made recently. Certainly internally with inside Broadridge, we've realized that you've got to get the people capable of getting the most out of the tool. Otherwise, it ends up being something like a slick new search engine. There's a heck of a lot more to it than that. And
What's the yeah?
so,
Let's get into it from there then. The skills that people need. An LLM is very intuitive. That's why it's had such an impact, right?
yep,
Even morons like me can prompt something. Uh,
yep,
what's the difference between that and, as you say, just a search engine plus plus
yeah.
versus the kinds of things that a financial institution would want to use this for in a way that would have meaningful impact on either revenues or efficiencies.
So that we've got used to having a relatively clever Google search engine for years. Everyone has it on their phone. It's on most laptops. But that is nothing more in some ways than a very capable index crawler,
Hmm.
because Google has, or whoever is the search engine you use, Yahoo, whomever, they have indexed the web. So you're able to match what you're looking for in a relatively clever but indexed way. What AI enables you to do is take the index out of the way and be able to search for meaning and capability, but not just search. It's able to then construct a response back to you. that is based on what it has been taught over millions and millions and trillions of pages of data. So it is on the way in, it looks a bit like a search engine, but on the way out, it just doesn't give you index hits. It gives you a heck of a lot more in terms of a very specific answer. So I think to a lot of people who just look at what it can do is, tell me a joke or write me country music lyrics or whatever, it can do that. But it's amazing what it can do when you know how to use it. And it's called, in the case of generative AI, LLMs, it's called prompting, being able to prompt. A bit like talking to your lawyer. The quality of the answer is only as good as the question that you
Mhm.
ask in the first place.
So when you talk to clients, whether it's asset managers or investment banks or corporate banks, a lot of what you're talking about is just trying to understand their business model so that they can ask better questions so they can get more material results.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, one use of an AI capability in the case of let's say an asset manager can now avoid having his staff read thousands of documents and try and understand and generate a sort of opinion based on that. They can use AI to do that component for them. That's one side of it. Another side of it is AI has turned out to be really exceptional at looking at unstructured data
Mhm.
or even structured data in a particular way. Like you may want to look at the last week's trade data and look for anomalies in the trade data. Now, previously, that would involve programmers, IT people, a data warehouse, and all kinds of things, but AI enables you to just point it at that data and generally be able to get what you want using natural language interface. That's a major change in how, on one side, in how your staff inside an organization can increase the amount of information they can bring to bear in the case of, please look at these 1,000 articles on this particular thing, or interacting with data that is important for day-to-day running of the business.
I think it's amazing that in China, DeepSeek, which is the
Mm.
leading LLM there, came out of a hedge fund. And we see now a rise of quant funds in China that just use generative models, just like ChatGPT might help me with by predicting the next word in a response after a massive training set. They're doing the same thing for short-term stock movement predictions. So if I'm one of your clients that maybe not a purely quant-driven hedge fund, but I have a more traditional setup, and yet I see these very small, nimble, aggressive players that are just being run by data engineers and machine learning experts. What's the level of skill set that I need to be thinking about? And how do I make sure that I'm not trying to necessarily replicate what a quant fund does. I have a much broader financial institution remit, but just looking ahead about the way that a very small team can create outsized performance just using this technology.
Hmm.
How do you make sure that your clients are going to be fit for purpose, um, the way they think about the tools, what they need to know? Because not everybody, I'm not a data scientist. I could never do this stuff. And I'm sure that's true for many other very smart, experienced people. How do they make sure their skill set is still relevant?
Yeah. I think we're in most cases still some way to go before the average financial institution is going to trust AI to make a decision on what to trade when. But I think today we're at a point where AI is being used to help you make a better decision
Mhm.
by enabling you to deal with more data sets, more inputs, and have maybe a better decision made at trading. So pre-trade, a lot of the data around how, the analysis of what to trade and making that decision, all the things that you need for that. AI is fantastic at increasing the breadth of what you can bring to bear, but the person still makes the trading decision. Then post trade, you want to rebalance your portfolio. You want to ask, see whether there are pools of liquidity that maybe you're not taking advantage of. AI can be great at that, but I think
Yeah.
today we're still looking at the actual trade decision being
When,
made by the person.
when you look at your own business at Broadridge, tell us a little bit about how are you using this technology to just be better optimizing what you already do?
Yeah.
And are you also thinking about ways it might create a very different way of approaching the services you offer, the problems that you help clients solve, that weren't possible before?
Well, we've decided that we can't help our customers with their AI journey if we're not excellent at it ourselves. So we set a very high bar internally on how we would move ahead with the use of AI within Broadridge. And that included us, from a technology side, choosing what engine we're going to use, building a secure and very well ring-fenced kind of sandbox, our own large language model, which enabled us to keep people inside that sandbox. And then we created an academy which trained everybody in how to do that. And we measured people's ability to go through that academy. We measure all of our associates during their annual review about the amount of AI usage they have, and we encourage folks to use it at every step. Even myself, I mean, you're admitting you're not a data scientist. Well, I'm not a natural AI user myself, but I use it on a daily basis to do some of the things that I normally may not have been able to get done in the time frame that I have available previously, like making sure that I'm fully up to date with summaries of what went on overnight in the next day, so I get to see some of the color that my customers get to see. We use it now for more mundane things like minutes of meetings and taking notes of meetings and keeping track of things that are agreed, etc. But I think that we're a great case in point of an organization that had to make a very, very conscious decision. We're going to go all in on this. We're going to protect ourselves as much as we can, but we're aware there are potential pitfalls, data security and all those kind of lovely things. But we felt that if we weren't in that position, we would not be able to work with our customers, some of whom have not yet made that kind of decision internally.
I know you guys have many different products and product lines and client types. But one of the things that I think you got that Broadridge first established itself comprehensively in the US and globally is investor communications.
Yeah.
And LLMs are all about communication and natural language discussion and writing. Um, can you talk a little bit about that side of your business because it is sort of bread and butter for you?
It
Um,
is.
uh, how is this going to affect what you can do and the way you do it?
Well, again, to go back to some of the points we touched on earlier. Whilst 80% of our global business is still North America, and by North America I mean Canada and the US. And we have a very, very large business in investor comms. A large chunk of the US equities are basically the communication between issuer and investor is handled by us. That's a huge data volume. I mean, it's running into the billions, if not trillions, of messages and so forth. And that's a classic case of where AI can be very, very useful in like summarizing annual general meetings or being able to take a group of analyst calls, summarize those, or even build a video out of whatever the content is and pass that out to our customers. And that improves the customer's ability to understand what is in that actual item, but also make it a much more easily consumable data item. I generally would be horrified at having to read multiple annual general reports,
Right.
from a large publicly traded company. It'd be nice to get a summary of the salient points. So those kind of things are very, very helpful for that business. Like you point out, it's a comms business, and the clarity of the comms is very, very crucial. So AI is a very important part as we move forward in that.
And what other areas, when you're doing some of the more technical work in capital markets, I've spoken with Broadridge about a variety of different areas of uh, brokerage services, blockchain and repo, a whole gamut. Where is sort of the pointy edge of the stick right now when it comes to AI?
So there's three things really. One is being able to use it to analyze massive data sets. So that might be, as I said earlier, summarize trades that didn't work well out of the last week's trades. It could be millions of trades. How do you analyze those in a reasonable time? So there's that one. That's already inside some of our products that we call Ops GPT and Bond GPT that allow our customers, should they wish to use AI to analyze pre and post trade data sets to get long-term historical information. The second item is what we might call agentic AI, where you're actually, this is very, very new and very, very leading edge, where you actually have agents or bots, or I don't think everyone's settled on a name for these things yet, but these are things that do actual work for you, like maybe rebalance your portfolio in the background, or search for liquidity in the market, or even make the trading algorithm choice for you. And you can assemble a large part of your trading flow using these bots. That's a very, very new thing, and in fact, we just got a patent on one of those in the last few weeks. I think that's the next 2 years of technology right there. That's the whiz bang stuff we're going to be seeing. And the third one is, you mentioned about digital technology, particularly what people call blockchain, distributed ledger. We have a distributed ledger repo product now out in the market. And it's interesting to see where digitization of assets is going to go in the future. All of that will play into the AI world as we go ahead, because it'll make everything digitized and much easier to address with compute technology, the way we're
Yeah.
seeing that go.
With agentic AI execution capabilities, a commonly known problem with LLMs is hallucination.
Yep.
You can't get, if an agent, even if the percentage rate is very low, an error like that could be catastrophic. How do you think about the risks around making sure that the problems, the well-known problems with AI and LLMs in particular, because it is, as you mentioned earlier, brute force, but there's limits to that. How do you make sure that that doesn't translate into an agent that gets it wrong?
Well, obviously, to err is human, as they say. Well, you can also say to err is AI. Yeah, I think that's why, as I said earlier, that the decision of trade or no trade is still left to a person. I think what we can do now is we can make that trade decision better informed
Mhm.
by using AI to inform that trade decision. I still think we are quite some way away from AI being so well trusted that it could automate larger parts of the decision around the trade. Because as you say, even if you had a 0.0001% hallucination or quote unquote error rate,
Right. But you
I
scale that
think,
up and
yeah,
yeah,
you scale it up amongst millions or billions of trades, and it could become very, very material, particularly if the one trade it happens on happens to be a gigantic one. So, I think the risks are very, very high, even today, if you use it in the wrong place. So I think that that's what the caution is. And a lot of the financial institutions that I'm talking to are very attuned to that. Some
of
have
course.
taken a very aggressive approach and said, no AI whatsoever. You can't touch this stuff. It's not being used. I think that's probably a little too conservative. But I think you can very carefully look at where your risks are and use it, very carefully in that with that in mind.
Yeah. And one last question on this point. Where does the liability reside? Tech, Traditionally, big IT projects are centralized top-down things that sort of get basically enforced on teams. But with LLMs, there's a real intuitive element to it. A lot of banks are trying to ring fence experiments or sandboxes internally to see what their own people come up with. So, how do you set up the governance around something where there can be
Yeah.
so many people experimenting with something at the same time?
Yeah, and it's in some ways, when you look at liability, it's a bit like that old joke about two self-driving cars are in a collision, who's at fault, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, you got some of that happening here. At the end of the day, all of us can make use of tools, but we have the responsibility to make sure we use them appropriately. And I think that's what, the risk managers in organizations need to be very, very well aware of. I think risk management recently was about, does my data center in danger of burning down, or are my traders allowed to put the firm at too much risk and margin or whatever? But now there is a digital risk, because a lot of organizations are now running on what is really IT capabilities that are changing in real time. You used to have to go and use an application that was built, set in stone by developers and audited and all the rest of it. AI can give you the ability to create things on the fly, which
In
could
the cloud,
become
it's
very,
not
very
on-prem either,
material.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the risk managers need to have a really, really clear view and not just trust people to do it right. Make sure everyone is engaged and trained, and you've put the ring fences in the right places at the right time. So this is very much front and center of risk managers these days.
What do you see going on in Japan? You're based in Tokyo. Would love just to get to wrap up here, Dave, with a sense of some of the nuances of using this technology or working with clients in Japan and Asia.
But Japan, like it is with a lot of other technology, Japan is not very comfortable usually being in first place
Mhm.
in these kinds of things. They tend to want to take something that has been proven elsewhere and make a local equivalent of it. I have seen a bit more experimentation with AI than I have with other technology trends. Let's say cloud computing took a very long time to take off here. Now, cloud computing is an essential for AI, but it took many, many, many years longer here for that to become mainstream. I'm seeing this going faster. The challenge Japan has is the skill set to use it. Do they have the people to use it? I've seen some really, really clever things done with AI here around uh, research and language translation to allow people in Japan to use more things that may not be in Japanese and readily get that to work. But the emergency here is that Japan doesn't have enough skilled workers, and it's got to replace a lot of that
Mhm.
with AI type technology. So I can see that an accelerating pace to try and augment what are probably relatively low employee numbers given scale of requirements. So AI is a very, very important part here. More now probably to replace workers they can't get, to automate those functions rather than do what, say, in Hong Kong, where they can get those kind of skills easier. You're seeing folks focus on quality of outcome first and foremost.
Yeah. And Broadridge in Japan, do you have what's on the product line or the shelf? What are you planning
Well,
or
our two
hatch?
biggest businesses here are our two biggest direct businesses here are post trade, and that's a very rich place for AI to be in. That's looking at trade and matching data and all of that kind of stuff. The other one is our connectivity. So we have different types of connectivity here for JASDEC and Swift, etc. But we also have a joint venture here with the Japan Stock Exchange with TSE to deliver essentially our investor relations business from the US is delivered here in Japan by a joint venture with the exchange. And a very significant chunk, over 90% of listed companies in Japan use that service here. And that is one we're looking at how to do the same AI tricks that we're looking in the US to do.
Great. David Runacres, I think our time is up. I really want to thank you for coming and spending time with me on DigitalVox and talking us through what's going on with artificial intelligence.
You're most welcome. Thank you. It's been enjoyable.